بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا، إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. I praise Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to send countless blessings and salutations on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family, his companions, and all those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. And I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us noble, honorable, and sincere intentions. As we mentioned many times, that the primary sciences of our religion are three: the science of al-aqidah, the science of al-fiqh, and the science of at-tasawwuf. And each and every one of us must learn a sufficient amount of each science so that our acts of worship are performed in a valid manner. Each and every one of us must learn a sufficient amount of these three sciences so that our acts of worship are performed in a valid manner. We must remove the plague of al-Wahhabiyya from our learning process. I want you to put that. I mean it as I say it. We must remove the plague of al-Wahhabiyya from our learning process. Sometimes being vague does not help us. Sometimes we have to be explicit. So I want us to put it. We must remove the plague of al-Wahhabiyya from our learning process. Could everyone copy that and put it up? What do I mean by that? There is a proper methodology that is known among Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah on how to learn our religion. And that system has been established from the time of the Salaf through the time of Al-Khalaf to our time today. If we keep submitting to an innovative way of learning, it's going to hinder us from ever learning the deen properly. I watched let me reword this. Oftentimes, we see people, due to the Wahhabi learning process, do things that they are no way in the world qualified to do because they have no respect for the classical learning process of Islam. And unlearned people allow people to operate on their religion all the time because they don't know the value of learning properly. So a person never becomes a student, never learned. No, you never ever learned, period. Never learned. You never sat with a teacher and finished a book in anything. Yet, the person would be giving religious judgments. You've never learned, ever. And what do we mean by learning? When we say learning, what we mean by that is learning directly from a teacher through a text in a particular Islamic science. So put that up. When I say learning, what I mean is learning from a teacher, a reliable text in one of the Islamic sciences. That's learning. So you would find a person giving legal judgments, giving judgments in other matters that they never learned, not even once. And this is due to this innovative way of learning, which tells people you don't need teachers, you don't need books, just do it yourself. Like Nike in Islam or something, just do it. We have to break that spell, and we have to discipline ourselves to get out of that, which may not be easy because we're surrounded by it. But we have to break it. We have to break it. And that's what we've been trying to do on this platform, on Masjid Muhammad's platform, is to train us to learn and have a respect for the learning process. So maybe we should put that. We must have a healthy respect for the traditional Islamic learning process. Can we put that? We must have a healthy respect for the traditional Islamic learning process. One more time. We must have a healthy respect for the traditional Islamic learning process. And that's it. Stop being so disrespectful. It's not healthy, especially when it comes to Islamic learning. We respect every other aspect of learning in every worldly field, but when it comes to Islam, complete disrespect. That's traditional Islamic learning process. So I just wanted that as an opening because inshallah, I intend, as we have been doing, to take you through the traditional Islamic learning process. But in order for me to do it, you have to have a healthy respect for it, which requires three basic things: sincerity, commitment, and focus. Sincerity, commitment, and focus. To study properly, you need those three things besides the teacher and the book. I'm learning for the sake of Allah. I'm committed and eagerly pursuing that knowledge. And I'm focused on it, right? I'm not all over the place. So I want to, for the next 2 days or 3 days maybe, I want us to read through this text and to be committed to finish this text in several ways. Firstly, by reading it together and clarifying the basic text in a way that each and every one of us know what it contains. So if I asked any one of us, what's in the book, Ark of Salvation, Safinatun Najah, each and every one of us could tell me. And could tell me what is not in it from the next text. So every time we would cover a book, you would know what each book contains in terms of its merit. You need this book for that, this book for that, this book for that, this book for that. Yesterday, I was reading a new book that came out. And as I was reading this book, I immediately noticed significant things that were missing that were in other books. And which books were those other books? And what was needed that was missing in this book? That only occurs when we're focused and we're in the text. And I want the same for us in everything we study. And then one day we move to memorizing, but maybe not everyone can do that. So for the one who cannot memorize, which is even if you are memorizing, for all of us, we need to understand our texts and their contents well. So inshallah, we reached up in our reading to page number 17, and we're in the section of an-najasa, which is filth in Islam, in terms of things that if you come in contact with them, they must be removed and cleaned properly. Now, Bismillah. Let us recite Fatiha to the soul of the author, Sheikh Salim bin Abdullah bin Sumair al-Hadrami al-Shafi'i, al-Fatiha.
بسم الله الرحمن بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, filth. What can be purified? The types of filth that can be purified are three. Number one, wine when it becomes vinegar on its own. Number two, the skin of an animal that died without being slaughtered when it is tanned. And number three, whatever becomes a living creature. Categories. The grades of filth are three. Number one, heavy grade, مغلظة. Number two, light grade, مخففة. And number three, medium grade, متوسطة. Heavy grade is the filth of dogs, pigs, and the offspring of either one of them. Light grade is urine from a male infant who was fed only milk and has not reached 2 lunar years. Medium grade is all other types of filth. How to clean.
And those types of filth are necessary to know, because from them, you're going to know what you need to do to remove that najasa. So all of those types of najasa, and the word in Arabic for filth that we use in this term, the legal term, is an-najasa, right? So when those filthy things are of levels, and each level, if it's heavy grade, if it's light grade, or if it's medium grade, they're cleansed in different ways. So it's important to know which type of najasa you're dealing with, so you know how to properly clean it. So there are categories in the types of najasa, and then once you know the types, you know how each type must be treated.
How to clean. Heavy grade filth is purified through 7 washings after having removed its substance, with soil accompanying one of those washings.
So if you're talking about the najasa of the dog or the pig or its offspring, which is considered a heavy grade of najasa, it must be purified with purifying water. And when I say purifying water, I mean water that is pure in itself, and it can be used to purify other things. We'll discuss that in other books with more details. But for right now, we want to just know it's purifying water. that must be used to remove an najasa. So, with that water, you must wash the affected item 7 times with this purifying water. One of those washes must be mixed with pure soil. So you have 7 washes, one of which must be mixed the water with pure soil.
A correction was added here. Light grade filth is purified by sprinkling it with water, provided it overwhelms the affected area and removes its substance.
So light grade filth is that filth or the urine of the small boy who only had his mother's milk. And this najasa, one just sprinkles the water over it, and it is suffice. So that was missing from the text altogether, right?
It actually said medium grade, but we changed the word medium to light.
Right. So that should be light grade on my pens. Okay.
Medium grade filth is divided into 2 divisions. 1, physical, ainiya, and 2, legal, hukmiya.
Legal, hukmiya, we'll come to that. Okay, go ahead.
Physical filth has a color, smell, and taste. Its color, smell, and taste must be removed by water.
So when we say the physical najasa, that is the najasa you can see. So you can see the essence of the najasa. So when you can see the essence of the najasa, then you must remove its color, its smell, and its taste.
Legal filth is without color, taste, and odor. It is enough that water flows over it.
So this is najasa that you cannot see its essence, meaning it has been affected by najasa, but its physical traces have disappeared, but you know it's there. This type of najasa is by pouring water over it. For instance, if you had some urine that was clear and didn't have a smell, you knew it was on the clothes, but you can't see it, but you knew exactly where it's at. In this case, you would just pour the water over the area. Or anything that was similar to that, which would be a clear najasa.
Menstruation. The minimum duration for menstruation is 1 day and night. Its typical length is 6 or 7 days. Its maximum is 15 days and nights. The minimum amount purification between 2 menstruations is 15 days. Its typical duration is 24 or 23 days. There is no limit to its maximum. The minimal length of postnatal bleeding is a moment. Its typical amount is 40 days. Its maximum is 60 days.
So postnatal bleeding is the bleeding that the woman has after having a baby. So in this book, we covered the section of at-tahara. So we talked about puberty, al-bulugh, when the person becomes morally responsible in terms of when these become obligations on them, when they're pubescent. We talked about al-istinja and the material that is used to clean oneself after using the lavatory. We talked about the obligations of al-wudu, of ablution, and the meaning of the intention related to that. We talked about the amounts of water and how do we distinguish between a lot of water and a little bit of water. We talked about the things that necessitate an obligatory bath, which is al-ghusl, a purificatory bath. And we talked about the obligations or the integrals of that purgatory bath. We talked about the prerequisites or the conditions of ablution. We talked about the invalidators of ablution. We talked about the things which are unlawful to do when one is in a state of minor or major ritual impurities. We talked about at-tayammum, dry ablution. We talked about its integrals, its conditions. And then its arkan and its invalidators, its obligatory acts and its invalidators. And then we just covered the section of an-najasat, filth, and al-hayd wal-nifas, the menstrual cycle of the woman and postpartum bleeding. And all of those are in the section of at-tahara, purification. And at-tahara is mentioned before as-salat, before the prayer, because at-tahara is a condition for the validity of prayer. In other words, without an excuse, a valid religious excuse, one must perform at-tahara before one prays. So that subject matter is going to come first before you learn about prayer. So whenever you are learning or actually trying to explain to someone who doesn't know, before you teach them to pray, you need to teach them the rules of at-tahara in terms of the conditions, the integrals, and the invalidators in the section of purification for every act of purification and what that entails. Is this clear before we move on? And the question, please, when you ask the question, make sure it's about what's in the text. Don't go outside the text, right? Make sure it's related to understanding what is in the text. I want to try to help us with this. What is in the text? If you have some other things in your mind that is not in the text, wait till we reach them in the text. Good question. Or the next text. What does integral mean? Integral is an obligatory part of an act of worship that is a part of the act that must be maintained in order for the act to remain valid. So when we say integral, we mean the obligatory part of an action. So the integrals of wudu are the obligatory parts of al-wudu. The integrals of at-tayammum, dry purification, are the obligatory parts of dry purification. The integrals of al-ghusl are the obligatory parts of al-ghusl. The integral parts of al-istinja are what is obligatory to do in istinja, for instance. Okay, inshallah, we'll move on. Tahara means, what does tahara mean? A tahara, I'll spell it better for you. It means purification. And purification has many types, which we discussed in the text. Right? So at-tahara means the state of purification. And there are different types of things to be in the state of ritual purity. Okay, Bismillah. Bismillah, continue.
Prayer. Excuses. The excuses for prayer are two. Number one.
Meaning the excuses for missing the prayer without being sinful. So when I say the excuses, meaning one missed the prayer, and because of these excuses, one would not be sinful.
Number one, sleep. And number two, forgetfulness.
Meaning one slept from the time the prayer came in to it exited, and one was still sleeping. One needs to make up that prayer, but one is not sinful. Or if one forgot about the prayer altogether and then remembered after its time had passed, then one has to make up that prayer. But because of forgetting, not leaving it out, one forgot. One is not sinful.
Prerequisites. The prerequisites for prayer.
The prerequisites are shurut. So they are a shurut. Excuse me, sorry. They are those things that must be done before the prayer can begin in a valid manner. So because we're talking about the shuruts of the prayer, right? The conditions of the prayer. So those things we must do before the prayer can begin in a valid manner.
Number one, purity from minor and major impurification. Number two.
And we said minor and major ritual impurity are the states by which one would need al-wudu if it is minor and al-ghusl if it is major. So one needs to be purified from those states.
Number two, purity of the clothes, body, and place of prayer. Number three, covering
purity from an-najasa, from filth in one's clothes, in one's body, and the place of prayer. And you can add, and what one carries in the prayer. So purity from an-najasa, which we talked about, whether it was heavy grade, medium grade, or light grade. One cannot pray with any of those najasas on one's clothes, on one's body, on one's place of prayer, or what one carries in the prayer.
Number three, covering one's nakedness. Awrah.
We mentioned the nakedness for the free man is what is between the navel and the knees. And for the woman, everything except her face and her hands.
Number four, facing the direction of prayer. Number five, the time for the prayer having entered.
The direction of prayer is Al-Kaaba in Mecca.
Number six, knowing that the prayer is obligatory.
So 5 and 6, 5, you must know the times of the prayer. And we're going to learn later how to determine the times of prayer without the prayer schedule. Because sometimes the prayer schedule is incorrect. And if one followed an incorrect prayer schedule and prayed before its due time, then one's prayer would not be valid. So one needs to observe the signs, like the sun, the moon, the stars, the shadows, to know correctly the times of prayer. And we'll talk about it. Knowing that the prayer is obligatory, meaning that one does not deem an obligatory prayer as optional. So even if one prayed the obligatory prayer, but one believed that that prayer was optional, then the prayer would be invalid.
Number 7, not believing one of its obligatory acts to be recommended.
So the prayer has integrals, which we already talked about. We said in the Shafi'i school, the integrals or the obligatory parts of prayer are 17. So one cannot deem one of those acts to be optional or recommended. If one, even if one performed them, it is not valid. One must know that these are obligatory parts and must believe that.
Number 8, avoiding invalidators.
Meaning to avoid everything that would invalidate the prayer. So then one must learn, as we said, its invalidators. What things invalidate the prayer so one does not fall into them.
Causes of ritual impurification. The events occasioning a purification are 2.
Say that again.
Causes of ritual impurification. The events occasioning purification are 2.
Not purification. The events occasioning purification. Maybe we should say the events. I don't like that at all. Let me see. Let's reword this whole thing. Ritual impurity is of 2 types. Ritual impurity is of 2 types, right? Minor and major. Let's say it like that. Ritual impurity is of 2 types, minor and major. Okay, go ahead.
So do you want me to keep the heading causes of ritual impurification?
Yes.
Ritual impurity is of 2 types.
So causes of ritual impurification. You could say ritual impurification, that's the word, I never know that word, same as ritual impurity, are of 2 types.
Ritual impurification are of 2 types.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1, minor, and number 2, major.
Mm-hmm.
Minor events require ablution. Major events require the purification bath.
So what are those 2 types? Al-hadath, al-asgar, right? Which is minor ritual impurity, right? And the other, and al-hadath al-akbar, which is major ritual impurity, right? So Al-ahdath is the plural of hadith. So hadith is of two types. Major, al-asghar, ritual impurity. And when in the books, they'll just say al-hadith. And that's meant, when you just see al-hadith by itself, it means minor ritual impurity. And al-hadith al-akbar is major ritual impurity, which is called al-janaba, right? Al-janaba. So al-hadith al-asghar necessitates al-wudu. You must perform ablution. Al-hadith al-akbar necessitates al-ghusl. You must perform the purificatory bath. And we learned already the things that cause or necessitate al-wudu. And we also learned the things that necessitate al-ghusl when we were in the section of at-tahara. Okay, go ahead.
Categories of nakedness. The categories of nakedness are four. Number one, the nakedness of a man unconditionally.
Nakedness, al-awra, right? So we talked about among the conditions of the prayer is covering one's unlawful nakedness. So he's going to talk about the different categories of the unlawful nakedness that must be covered in the prayer.
The nakedness of a man unconditionally and of a female slave during prayer is what lies between the navel and the knees. Number two, the nakedness of a free woman
So
during
the
prayer.
area between the navel and the knees would entail that the navel and the knees is not aura. However, the scholars say that you must cover the navel and the knees to ensure that the aura is not exposed. So for men who want to go swimming or play basketball or some sports, they should wear some shorts that come above the navel and below the knees. Don't cut it off at the knees, so then when you move, your outer is uncovered. So the short should be below the knees and above the navel. Now, this is what is obligatory to cover. That doesn't mean we should pray like that. That's not recommended to pray like that. But if all one had to cover was that amount, then that is valid. And one could pray like that.
Number two, the nakedness of a free woman during prayer is her entire body other than her face and hands.
Notice here, the author says, وَالْعَوْرَةُ الْغُرَّةِ فِي الصَّلَاةِ جَمِيعُ بدنها ما سوى الوجه والكفين. That the free woman in prayer, her aura is her entire body except the face and the hands, which means she must cover her feet. In the Shafi'i school, if one prays with one's feet uncovered as a woman, her prayer is invalid. However, this is an issue that is different upon by the Mujtahidun scholars. When we say Mujtahidun, all of you should know it by now. When I say Mujtahidun or Mujtahid scholars, what is meant by that? All of you should answer this. So I said it's a difference of opinion by the Mujtahid scholars. Who are the Mujtahid scholars? What is meant by that? Allah. Come on, come on, come on. Help us out, inshallah. Right, right. Much good. Those scholars who are capable of deducing legal rulings from the Quran and Sunnah, or say the primary Islamic scholars, the primary Islamic sources. Miss Joanne, uh, what woman is considered a slave? This is not talking about a particular woman, but there were uh, in times where there were slaves. Sometimes they were women, sometimes they were men that were captured and didn't embrace Islam during wartime. They were taken as slaves. And there's rules how slaves are dealt with in the religion, in the Quran and the Sunnah. So even though we don't have that now, the rule is not lifted. The rule is still the rule in the religion. We just happen to not have slaves. So, and the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to free slaves. So you're going to see that in the Quran and the Sunnah often. So there are rules to that. So we have to learn the rules, even if they're not applicable in our time, but there's still rules for it. Islam is for all times and place, not just for one time and one place. Good. Okay, so I would suggest to our sisters, do not switch madhabs for desire. So someone is learning and then they're lazy or they just don't want to, so they don't cover their feet and then say, I'm Hanafi. Don't treat your religion like that. Whenever there's a difference of opinion, it is agreed upon the scholar that it's permissible to cover and permissible and preferred to follow the strict opinion when possible, right? So if all I have to do is put on socks, the Hanafi doesn't say it's unlawful to cover your feet with socks, right? They said it's not an obligation to cover the foot. But in the Shafi school, it's an obligation. So the one who was Hanafi who covered their feet would not be blameworthy. Whereas the one who was Shafi and didn't do it would be sinful and the prayer would be invalid according to that school. So keep a rule. Following the more strict legal ruling when possible is preferred, right? Can we put that up? Following the strictest legal ruling in an issue when possible is preferred. I'm trying to understand why it's better to pray after the prescribed time. Oh, you misunderstood. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm trying to understand why it is better to pray after the prescribed time rather than before if one is going to miss the prescribed time. Because if you pray before the prescribed time, the prayer is not valid. Allah said, إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا. That the prayer is prescribed on the believers at specific times. So it's a condition of the prayer that its time is in. Let me go up. I'm sorry. Thank you. Because, as I said, as I was explaining, if you pray before its time, Dhuhr is not in, so it never was performed. If you pray after its time, it's a makeup prayer, and you did pray the prayer. But if you didn't have a valid excuse, then your prayer would be sinful. If you have a valid excuse, you're not sinful, and you still make the prayer up. That's why. Because it's a condition of the prayer that is performed after its time has come in. I'm trying to catch some of these questions. Sometimes it's very hard to not be yourself. Because I like to have fun and crack jokes and stuff, but it's not always befitting. So, Tahira, I'm going to spare you because it's not befitting. But I had a nice one for you. Uh, okay. Did I get everything? Okay, go ahead. So the point is cover one's feet. Also, there is an indication that outside the prayer, the aura for the woman, in the strictest opinion in the Shafi'i school, is all of her body. So her face and hands must be covered. That's the strictest position in the Shafi'i school. And the indication is there. Because he says, wa awratul hurrati fi salah. The aura, the unlawful nakedness of the free woman in the prayer is all of her body except her face and hands. That means outside the prayer, it's different. Go ahead.
Number 3. The nakedness of a free female and a slave in front of unrelated men is the entire body.
Unrelated men means men she can marry, which is called al-ajanib. So it's the entire body. So mean she must cover her face as well.
Number 4. The nakedness of the last
That's
category.
the strictest opinion. As I said, there are other opinions that say that the face is not aura, right? And then some say if there's no fitna, there's no fear of temptation. So there's different rulings. But the strict ruling and the safe ruling, which many of our scholars were of that position, that the woman needs to cover her face. So even though we may find specifically like in Masjid Muhammad, we don't order the women or we don't force on women to cover their faces. But we do tell them the rule, right? We do tell them the rule, right? But in our case, what we look at is the level of people in applying the rules. Some people are not there. So you must facilitate when there is the ability to facilitate. So if there's room in the sacred law, you don't censor people. You understand everyone has levels, right? But the one who can have a different level and a different and can handle more strict rulings, then you tell them the strict ruling and encourage them to follow it. So are you saying the niqab is mandatory in that case? According to the strictest opinion in the school, yes. But not in prayer, outside the prayer, in the presence of marriageable men. Thank you for clarifying the issue about socks. It's not a difference of opinion amongst mujtahid within the Shafi'i. There are differences of opinion within the Shafi'i school, but those opinions are not weighty. So there are Shafi'i scholars who said the feet are not awra, but their opinion has no weight in the school. So yes, even within the Shafi'i school, there are different sayings among mujtahidun scholars in the madhab that whether the feet is awra or not. But that is not considered a position of the Shafi'i school. It is an independent position of those respective scholars that in the Shafi'i school is not relied upon. Yeah, there are level of strictness. Yes, of course. I think I'll stop here. Am I finished? No, one more.
Number 4. The nakedness of the last category when with their male relatives and women is what lies between the navel and the knees.
Right. Okay, good. And we'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Please, I'm going to ask you to bear with us. I need to get through this book and I need to move on to other books without a lot of details. If we get in the habit, and please, I need you to cooperate with me in this, right? Because I believe I'm failing miserably in this. Fiqh is very dry. Just talking about a bunch of rules oftentimes can be difficult. So I don't like to stay in fiqh books too long. I like to do fiqh. We go over the rules, we master the rules, we move on to something else, we read another book, and then we build on the rules like that. I don't like to take one book and go into lengthy explanations. It's too much. I mean, that's my way. And most people, you'll end up with a class with 3 people because most people can't handle it. But that's from experience. But if we go reading, we cover an area, we highlight some things, we do some other sciences, tasawwuf, aqidah, hadith, tafsir, seerah. Then we come with another book, we read, we add some more details, but we make sure we keep reading the books over and over again. After a period of time, you master the rules of fiqh and it wouldn't be that hard. Y'all follow what I'm talking about? Because if it's just a bunch of rules, people get bored quick. Most people I've discovered don't like rules. Very few people like to be told a bunch of rules. So you have to teach them rules in an enjoyable way. That's why people don't follow madhabs, because the Wahhabi madhab tells you do whatever you like. There's no rules. You make it up as you go along. But with the 4 schools, there is a systematic set of rules, and you have to know them. And for people who hate following rules, it makes it difficult. So we do it in time. The niqab is a legal ruling. It's not a cultural thing. It's in the madhabs. That's not cultural. That's the rule in the religion. Now, culturally, how they do it, the style, that may be cultural. Different ways of covering the face from culture to culture. But covering the face is a legal ruling. It's not a cultural thing. That's a legal ruling. Oh, okay. Here's the thing. A lot of times people think things are cultural because they didn't learn al-fiqh, right? And the reason why they didn't learn al-fiqh, because what spread in our communities, in our society, is not following the madhab. So by not following the madhab, you never learn the rules. Because the person who was giving you rules wasn't a mujtahid scholar or didn't learn from mujtahid. So they were making up rules as they go along, doing textual deduction without the requisite skill set, and you were left with a shattered religion that doesn't have any structure. So, and it's left up to guesswork. So therefore, you didn't know rules. But when we start studying books of al-fiqh, you're going to see that a lot of things are rules, has nothing to do with culture. It's the rule in the religion. Quickly, if there are any questions, today is Sunday. So, tonight we have a guest speaker that we will be interviewing, uh, Sheikh Harun Saleh, who is a brother from New Jersey who studied in Egypt with one of the great Maliki scholars, and he's back home teaching, and he is very good, very strong in Maliki fiqh. And we're going to have him on tonight at 6:30 in our series of Seeking Knowledge and Scholarship, where we've been interviewing so far. We've interviewed all of our brothers who came back from studying thus far. And we're going to continue that process of seeking knowledge and scholarship. So tonight at 6:30, we will have Sheikh Harun Saleh talking about his journey in seeking knowledge and scholarship within the Maliki school. So that would be a very interesting interview tonight. In fact, we were talking the other night, Friday night, and he said something that I was really inspired by. He said, the Maliki madhab has been done a disservice, and I want to correct that to the best of my ability. And he was talking about how and why. So that's going to be an interesting discussion, especially for those who are Maliki or want to know more about the Maliki school, that is his area. And he studied with one of the well-known Maliki teachers in Egypt, who is among the best that are in Egypt now. So that would be a good thing, inshallah. Why do Wahhabiyya think they have rules and don't? They pray by rules, don't they? Or do you mean they have rules, but not rules necessarily extracted by legitimate chains and texts and teachers? Exactly, the latter. They have rules, of course, but those rules are not deductions by qualified mujtahidun and rechecked by reliable books and reliable teachers and scholars with an unbroken chain. They don't have that. And even when the Wahhabi follows a madhab, he's always altering the madhab with his own ideas. So if you have a Wahhabi person says, I'm Shafi'i, most likely he's going to mix it in with some Wahhabi things that has nothing to do with the Shafi'i school. So that's why I said that. That's what I mean by that. So if you have a Wahhabi person that says, I'm Shafi'i, or I'm Hanafi, or I'm Maliki, they're going to do a disservice to the school 9 times out of 10. These questions about the rules of fiqh is a reason why the non-traditional sequence in learning usul al-fiqh, I agree with that. But I don't want us to make that a habit. We need to learn. We need to learn properly, right? We don't need to keep doing what we want. Sometimes we have to do what we're told. I know that's difficult for a lot of us, but sometimes you need that. Because what we want always ain't good for us. Sometimes you need to follow instructions. I know it kills us, but sometimes you need to follow instructions. So I don't recommend deviating from our tradition to convince us to follow the tradition, right? I believe that you can indicate, and that would help us follow the tradition, but I don't believe switching up our order of studying and learning to the extent where we are not doing what we need to do. So I think it's a combination of things, not one or the other. I think it's giving us helping tools, which would be usul al-fiqh in this case, while maintaining learning al-fiqh properly in the traditional way. Think long term. We have to get on board, right? What can you advise a student now in Egypt studying Arabic, memorization, fiqh in a Salafi environment? Get out that Salafi environment. You're in Egypt, go to Al-Azhar, go to the teachers of Al-Azhar. or go around people who are not Salafi, in addition to, if there's other reasons why the person is around Salafis, go meet some people who are not Salafi and study properly with them, even if you're in that environment. You're in Egypt, so it's available. And we can help with that if necessary, to point them to the people. We can put him with some people who know Arabic and who can help him, inshallah. Allah. Is there any final questions before we close out? So I'll see you tonight at 6:30, inshallah ta'ala. And then after that, Sheikh Walid Rifai will be beginning a new book in Arabic that he will be translating for us, inshallah. Barakallahu bikum wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.